to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today, we're going to focus attention on a country where a returned Peace Corps volunteer served several decades ago, and that is Guatemala. My guest today is an expert on Guatemala and on the U.S. Peace Corps. My guest today is Mark Walker. Mark is a returned U.S. Peace Corps volunteer from Guatemala. He is an award-winning writer, and he is the president of Million Mile Walker. His forthcoming book is titled The Guatemala Reader, Extraordinary Lives and Amazing Stories. Prior to that book, he wrote My Saddest Pleasures, 50 Years on the Road. Mark Walker, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thanks, Bill. It's great to be back. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Glad to have you back. We're going to get into your new book, your forthcoming book, but just kind of give us a little overview of the one, My Saddest Pleasures, 80 Years on the Road, and how it ties in to what we're going to be talking about.
Right. My Saddest Pleasures, it was actually part of my Yin and Yang of Travel series. And it really highlights the miscues and misadventures that are inevitable in travel, especially when you're in far off places, and what we learn from those errors and those problems. So it really is a focus on travel and difficult parts of the world and the things that we can learn. And as you know, it was recently named the best travel book by the Peace Corps Writers Group. So that was quite an honor.
It certainly was, most assuredly, yes. Well, why don't we move into, but before we do, let's mention your website, and our viewers can go to www.millionmilewalker.com to get more information about everything we're talking about today, and a lot more too, to be quite honest. So they can check that out. But let's talk about your new book and the Guatemala Reader. What is that about?
Well, the Guatemala Reader is it's really the focus on stories that I've learned from different advocates and authors and poets and filmmakers in Guatemala over the last 50 years. So this is not my story. This is their story, and it really focuses on the complexity, the diversity of Guatemala.
I see. And you went to Guatemala in the United States Peace Corps. You and I have a lot in common, and that's one thing. You're a former Peace Corps volunteer, SMI. I was in the Dominican Republic, not too far away from Guatemala, just across the Caribbean, so to speak. But the Peace Corps, is it fair to say that it changed your life completely and put you on a totally different trajectory from when you went into the Peace Corps?
Yeah, well, when I went in the Peace Corps, I could speak English, and that was it. And I'd never traveled outside of the country before. So yes, it had a tremendous impact. That, of course, was the focus of the different latitudes. And you know, I met my Guatemalan wife of 50 years. All three of our children were born there. I worked there for a number of different organizations over the years. After the Peace Corps, I worked as a consultant with CARE. I was assistant director for Plan International, and even helped set up a Guatemalan development agency called Fundaset. And then I went back years later, and I worked with the Cooperative Housing Foundation. And then for about 15 years, I took donors, different people from different parts of the world to Guatemala. So it's definitely my lodestar. And it really impacted me to this very day.
Should be a volunteer. Well, really, you should be an honorary citizen of Guatemala. You spend so much time there. That's remarkable. Now, a lot of people ask, and you may get the same question, where's the Peace Corps? Never hear about the Peace Corps. Well, the Peace Corps is alive and well. And if our viewers would like more information, they can go to www.peacecorps.gov and take a look at what's going on as far as the Peace Corps providing assistance to people in economically developing countries. And the Peace Corps may be something that they may be interested in. That'll be up to them. Well, let's go back to your book and talk about, well, first off, before we get into the substance, could you show your cover on your phone? You've got a beautiful cover.
And while I'm doing that, let me mention that one of the chapters in the book is 60 years of the Peace Corps in Guatemala. And
Oh, really? Okay.
yes, and it talks about what the volunteers that started it way back in the late '60s up to today. Of course, I interviewed volunteers after 2019-20 with COVID, and as you know, this was the only time in history where all the volunteers had to come home. So I interviewed them. How did it
Yes.
impact them? How did it impact the communities that they lived in? So here is the
Okay. Could
cover
you
of the new
pull
book.
that back just a little? Hey, perfect, right there. Okay. Tell us. It's got your name, Mark D. Walker, the Guatemala Reader. And how did
Yes.
you pick that young lady, that young girl, for your cover?
Well, this young girl is from Catalina Popular in the Lake Atitlan, and a photographer friend of mine, Clifford Nagel, took that picture, and he told me he was thrilled to see his picture on my book. Although, of course, I'd asked him ahead of time, but he said that this little girl would be the first one to see the cover as soon as he got it, because he lives fairly close to her community. So that's the person that did the book, that did the photo. And then the background, that's the highlands of Guatemala, up in an area called Alaska, and it's just sheep and a little bit of wheat. It's pretty desolate country, but it is spectacular. And this was taken by a fellow returned Peace Corps volunteer, Jay Schuff. So they're the ones who provided the photography, and of course, I came up with the title of Extraordinary Lives.
Very good. Well, let's talk about one of those extraordinary lives. Who are you going to feature today?
Well, there'll be three. There are three individuals that I wanted to talk about. One is Maria Martin. She is a Latino voice for NPR radio. You might have heard about her last week. Unfortunately, she passed away just a week ago, and she was on NPR. Her discussion about her and her tremendous impact was on NPR quite a bit. She is the one who set up Latino Voice, and she spent a lot of her career really bringing the voices of Latinos throughout the Americas. She also set up her own media center, Gracias Vida, and she trained journalists and Mayan radio announcers, because the radio is very important in Guatemala, especially amongst the Mayans, in maintaining their culture and sharing information. So I met her at the Peace Corps Connect conference in Austin, Texas. This was back in 2019, and I was there promoting another one of those extraordinary. Oh, I should mention, Maria. I decided to write my book in honor of Maria Martin, because she's such a special person. And then I met her at the Peace Corps Connect conference, and there there was another Mayan, another Guatemalan, who's another one of my extraordinary lives, Luis Argueta. Luis was given, he's a filmmaker, he was given the Orden del Quetzal, which is the highest award that a civilian can receive. And one of his first movies, El Silencio de Beto, was the first Guatemalan movie to be nominated in the Oscars. So he's a very special person, and I was involved in advocating for him to receive the Wolford Global Citizenship Award, and he was given that award by Ken Lehman, who was his teacher in Guatemala. So both Luis and Maria were on a panel about cross-border issues. The other person I wanted to mention is Francisco Goldman. His mother was a Guatemalan Catholic, father a Jewish Russian, and there's quite a mixture of cultures there. And his writing reflects that. As a matter of fact, his last book was Monkey Boy, which really discusses the different ways that you perceive things when you have different backgrounds, you speak different language. It's a fabulous book. Well, one of his books, The Art of Political Murder, was about the killing of the Bishop Girardi in Guatemala by the military. He he researched the book 7 years, and it was picked up by HBO, and it was nominated for an Emmy for best documentary. So those are a couple of the people that inspired me and that have inspired so many others. Now, the other part of the book was it's about stories, amazing stories, and here's one of those stories. This is there you go. In the Kingdom of Mescal, an adult Indian tale. And I picked this, I found this book at home in Evergreen, Colorado, after my parents passed on. And I opened up the book, and there was a little note from friends of my Guatemalan, German, Jewish friends of my wife who had come to visit my parents. And they wrote a little note in there thanking them for the book. Well, when I looked at the book initially, which has amazing pictures, and as a matter of fact, the Guatemalan artist Van Koos was the one that did them. But I mean, they're really exotic, spectacular. So I took it for granted. Well, this must be Mayan stories, because Nan Koos was part of the indigenous community that speaks Kikchi up in Koban. Well, it ends up that the German father, her mother was married to a German coffee grower. He went back to Germany. Then he sent his second wife to pick Nan up to get an and saying, well, we want to take her over there to get an education. Well, they took her. She didn't return for 32 years, but she met a photographer. This photographer is an interesting guy, George Schaefer, because he was doing experiments with psychedelics. That's why you get the Kingdom of Mescal. And he shared his information with Albert Einstein, among others. So this was some interesting stuff. So they got together and they worked on their way to Guatemala, they met up with Miguel Angel Asturias, who is the Guatemalan author that won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And that's why Miguel Angel wrote the introduction to some of the editions of this book. And the stories were not Mayan inspired. I found out, I interviewed the Nan Koos's son. It ends up that they were inspired by the French classic, The Little Prince. And it really became the Bible, or really the go-to book for all of the sort of hippie community in and around the lake. Now, let me just say one more thing about what's special about the book. I sent it to a couple of pretty well-known authors. One of them is Mark Jacobs, probably the most prolific Returned Peace Corps volunteer author. He's had 180 of his stories have been published in different places. He was a volunteer in Paraguay. He was with the State Department in Bolivia, and he wrote the book Stone Cowboy. This is what he said about the book. The author begins with a truth that all travelers will endorse. There is always one place, one culture and country that becomes your personal lodestar. The individual pieces are varied, and the theme and approach is different in this book. The evocative illustrations are superb. Even the map is just right, identifying the numerous locales in which Walker was worked, lived, and learned to appreciate the complex cultural reality of Guatemala. This book is good for everyone. So that'll give you an idea, some of the stories, some of the inspirational people that I highlight. And then the end of the book, I have a series of map, I have index graphs and some other things that we can discuss later on as well.
Mark, you've proven that the literary world is truly interdependent and interconnected, and it draws upon the wealth in other parts of the world. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps you're involved with an intra-campus television network, or you have a podcast, or you just have a computer, you like our shows, you would like to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're taking a look at Guatemala and the experiences, very joyful experiences of a former Peace Corps volunteer in that country. Mark Walker, his forthcoming book is the Guatemala Reader, Extraordinary Lives and Amazing Stories. Mark, we're going to be fighting the clock here in about 2 seconds, I've got a feeling, but let me ask you this before we get into your book. What is the current status? What's the situation in Guatemala today? Guatemala it's a beautiful country, delightful people. It's had a history of dictators. It's had a history of democracy at times. What is, in a minute or so, what is the current status?
First off, Alvaro Bernardo won in a landslide the last presidential election. Unfortunately, the powers at will don't want him to take power. So they've done two things. First off, they tried to disband his party, which was the Seed Party, Semilla Party. And secondly, now the head prosecutor wants to take away his immunity, which means they can throw him in prison any time. So what has been the response to this? First off, the U.S. recently has sanctioned 100 members of Congress, all of whom were involved in corruption. That's why the people voted for this guy in the first place. Secondly, Barclay says that if they continue to interfere with the elections, they're going to get a tremendous backlash from the international community. That's already started. The president of Chile, Spain, number of international groups have told them to get out of the way and allow this election to go through. And thirdly, according to Bloomberg, we just found out the bond market in Guatemala has tanked. So this is the response to this sort of negative situation. And then to even beyond that, we have one of the most renowned and respected editors of El Periódico newspaper has been in jail for over a year now, Ruben Zamora. And the government came up with some trumped up money laundering allegations, and they threw him in jail. So he's still there. And several members of the president-elect's party were also put in jail for up to 80 days. So this is the response. And, what's basically happened is that indigenous groups and labor leaders and students from all over the country have now emerged into Guatemala City, and they are protesting, and they continue to protest until Bernardo is allowed to take over as president.
And we see that there is a trend going around the world right now. We see it in the United States. We see it elsewhere, that there is a trend towards autocrats, dictators, people who want to basically ignore the constitutions in the various countries and just arbitrarily arrest people just because they don't like them, or they feel like they're unkind to them, or whatever the case might be. But we see this in many countries, in many thriving democracies, which is a very worrisome concept. But that leads me into another topic before we run out of time, and that is banning books. We've seen that in other parts of the world. It's very famous years ago during the Cold War in the communist, in the Iron Curtain countries and what have you. But we're seeing it now in a lot of these democracies I mentioned, and even in the United States. You're involved with a group called PEN. What exactly is that group, and what are they doing to try to thwart this, what I call immoral, illegal book banning?
I was attracted to PEN America because they represent writers, authors, and publishers from all over the world. They have chapters all over the world. They recently opened one here in Phoenix. We're dealing with some serious issues here. Our legislature is among 27 states they're passing a bill, in our case, Bill 700, to ban books. And this has impacted close to 4,000 books have been banned in this country, according to PEN, and 1,800 authors have been impacted. So that'll give you an idea of what the response is. Now, we have something special here in a situation, a special situation here in Arizona, and that is our supervisor of education is also trying to eliminate bilingual education. Now, mind you, we're on the Mexican border. Our major economic partner is Mexico, and he wants to eliminate bilingual education. So, and really, as a parent, we want our children to know a few languages so that they make it in the world. My oldest daughter happens to be, for the last 15 years, she's been a simultaneous translator here in the Phoenix court system. So this is the type of thing we want to see. But what's happening instead is, really classic books, Huckleberry Finn, among others, they're being banned. And it's one thing for a parent to say, no, I don't want my child to read this. But when he tries to impose those values upon the whole education district, and then we have a lot of harassment of our librarians, etc., then it starts to get out of hand. It has a very, very negative impact. So that's the situation here in Arizona, and that will give you an idea of what PEN does. Now, the other interesting thing is that PEN America is establishing partnerships with different writing groups. I'm a member of the Arizona Authors Association, and we're putting together a special event that highlights some of these issues and also how writer groups can partner with PEN in order to just to combat this negative backward attitude about banning books and changing our educational curriculum.
It's extremely dangerous. It's counterproductive, and it's unconstitutional in many areas. But we're seeing it. You're seeing it in Arizona, Florida, and many other states around the United States. And our viewers, if they would like more information on PEN America, they can go to www.pen.org, and they can also go to our website, globalconnectionstelevision.com. Suzanne Nossel, who is the CEO of PEN America, was on the program about a year ago, I guess it's been, but she did an excellent job on laying out this issue. So I would encourage people to take a look at it. Well, Mark, we're just about out of time, but in the last minute, what did we forget to talk about that we need to talk about, and to make sure we get it in before we run out of time?
Thank you, Bill. Well, I just wanted to say that one of the things I've decided to do because of the changes in the publishing industry, which I actually talk about in a webinar, trends in the publishing industry and how one travel writer develops his own author's platform. I write about what some of those trends are. You can find it on my website. But basically, I've been forced, just like a lot of smaller writers that have a smaller niche audience, to really move towards independent publishing. So this will be published through my Million Mile Walker company, and I'll be using what we call a Kickstarter crowd raiser to try to generate some funds from readers who get they have special incentives that I can offer. Signed copies of the books, certain books that'll have the colored photographs, and a couple of other things to motivate people. And this allows me to have direct sales to my readers and to have a relationship with my readers as well. So I'm excited about that. I hope to get it kicked off, the Kickstarter kicked off the beginning of next year, and hopefully the book will be out in March. And then, just for the record, I do have one other book that I just finished, Moritz Thompson Reader, and that's another story, but it's a Returned Peace Corps volunteer, probably the most renowned Returned Peace Corps volunteer author who is in Ecuador, and I'm writing about his life and other bringing in other authors who are like Paul Theroux, among others, who were motivated by Moritz Thompson.
These are all very interesting, and you've brought us up to date on some really interesting concepts. But there are two groups that we didn't have a chance to talk about that you and I have been involved with, who have been very supportive of the Peace Corps and of well-developed projects in many areas of the world. One's Rotary International, and our viewers can go to www.rotary.org to get more information on that. Worked on the Partnering for Peace to promote former Peace Corps volunteers to go to visit with Rotary clubs around the world, well, in their areas, to see about coordinating on projects. But we'll have to save those for another time and another place. But Mark Walker, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and very informative program.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Thank you.
Take care.